So the Epstein files, looking through them, there's mentions of Anglo-Irish Bank in them, and particularly, as you know, the Irish people bailed out Anglo-Irish Bank and other banks too during the recession in 2008. And it's very, very concerning that Jeffrey Epstein, along with Lord Manderson, who has many, many things to explain at the moment in terms of what he was doing, and we all know what he was up to pretty much. It's very clear to be told in the files. It's very clear with the photos, and it's very clear by his actions what he was doing, giving the information to the British government to Jeffrey Epstein that he's breaking his code of conduct and not in public office. But long story short, this was during the crash in 2008 when the banks went bankrupt in this country, all because they were all out on their private yachts skiing, doing everything else but managing the country. And of course the government, the fools, bailed them out. They bailed out the banks, and none of them were ever prosecuted for the people losing their millions of euro. Only Irish people losing their houses, losing their property, losing everything. But nobody was ever prosecuted. And I wonder why. Was this something to do with maybe? Because let's be fair, Jeffrey Epstein had high up friends. So did he put in a word saying not to prosecute these people? Because it's very suspicious how nobody was ever prosecuted for the crash of the country, and nobody ever spent any time in prison. Because there was many bankers up to some shady stuff that time, and Irish people don't trust the banks anyway. Let's be fair, the banks are not people you can trust. But the state owns the majority of Anglo-Irish Bank, and still does to this day, because obviously the country bailed them out. We shouldn't have bailed them out, but they did. But long story short, Jeffrey Epstein, along with Lord Manderson at the time, wanted to basically invest into Anglo-Irish Bank. And now this is very, very worrying. And we're talking about 3 billion, a lot of money. We are talking about a huge amount of money. And this is very, very concerning. And the fact of the matter with silence, apart from some media outlets like the Journal here or Governor, apart from that, the silence from the government, there's radio silence. You think straight away the government will be coming out and saying we're going to literally look in every page, look at every twist and every turn of the page to make sure this didn't happen, or if it did happen, or who suggested, who was talking to Jeffrey Epstein from Anglo-Irish Bank at the time about this investment, who was talking to him, what government TDs maybe were talking to him. You know, not a hit from the government, not a hit from Garda Síochána O'Connor saying that we're going to turn every page in the state to find out who was talking to them, etc. It's the same with this. Again, when you take this into account too, especially with the recent Epstein files too, with women saying they were trafficked from Ireland into the United States. It's very sus, because this is his private jet that came to Ireland and had probably underage girls that he was trafficking into Ireland and to the United States to do heinous stuff against them. And there's radio silence. You think the Irish state would be up in arms, you think Garda Síochána O'Connor would be tearing into places looking for records, etc. Or you think the defence forces even would be raiding the agencies that had these files and who shredded them. You think they'd be going after who shredded them to find out why they did it, who'd give them the authorization. You know, what was their story? Were they being paid to do it by somebody? You know, there's never been anything said about this, basically. There's never any repercussions, because it's very peculiar how this file, and I've looked into it myself, there's files going back to the 50s, take for example, planes in the 50s, so passenger planes. They're still around, you can still access them. But it's mysteriously the only plane you can't find out any details of who was on it, or when it turned up, or when it left Ireland, is Jeffrey Epstein's plane. It's very peculiar. Who was like this is definitely cover up. We could call it what it is. We have to call it what it is, because it's definitely cover up. Somebody's covering up for somebody somewhere in the government, because it's clear as day. And they should be tearing the place apart, the Irish government, to find out who shredded these evidence, who gave the order. But there's not a peep out of it. And especially because, again, in the Epstein files, there's 1,600 mentions of Ireland, which is very much for a small country like Ireland. It is a very small country. And it's 1,600, nearly 2,000 references in the 3 million page files to Ireland. And especially very deeply worrying ones, as I say, about girls being trafficked from Ireland into the United States on private jets, etc. Very, very deeply worrying. And the fact of the matter, the Irish government haven't arrested anybody here, because clearly there's people aiding and abetting Jeffrey Epstein, and still to this day there's people aiding and abetting Jeffrey Epstein in Ireland. Either they be politicians, and of course there's some high-ranking Irish politicians definitely involved, or former politicians that were definitely involved in his shenanigans and stuff that he was doing, and his evil stuff. And Anglo-Irish Bank too has a lot of explaining to do on how this came about, because it didn't happen, but it would have probably happened because he was looking into it and he was talking to people about it. So we have to know who he was talking to, etc., and what was the whole thing about it, because there's definitely something sauce. And I think this was around the time too he was first convicted of child prostitution and stuff, or soliciting prostitution from a minor. But still, we have no information. It's very, very, very concerning. And the fact of the matter, this is not the main thing in the country. It should be the main thing in Dáil Éireann at the moment, of why this happened. Because the country bailed out Anglo-Irish Bank. And especially with the Epstein files, the plane records mysteriously disappeared. Of course, the government probably have them somewhere. Like, let's be fair, the government have them somewhere deep in the files of their archives somewhere. They do. They probably got rid of the public archives of it, but definitely they kept it for themselves. We all know the government like keeping their own documents. But will we ever see them? Because again, the Irish state definitely has information on Jeffrey Epstein and what he was up to in Ireland. There's no doubt about it. They couldn't be that stupid. On God the Shin O'Connor of the feds. So they couldn't be that stupid. They can find out when you're not paying your tax, etc. They know what people are up to. But yeah, we will wait and see. But what I'm trying to say, everything needs to be found out about Jeffrey Epstein. Not even the Irish people deserve to know, but the victims deserve the truth and what was happening and who was involved with it. And we deserve too to get the people who was involved with Jeffrey Epstein and doing heinous stuff on his island, etc., or even trafficking women at all, and getting these people and putting them up, prosecuting them and leaving them in prison for the rest of their lives. That's what we should be doing. That should be the main focus of the Irish people, the Irish state, to make sure that these people who done these harm to these young girls are properly dealt with, and dealt with very formally. But the fact of the matter, nobody's been prosecuted, nothing's been done. It's deeply worrying. It sounds like to me like a cover up. There's no doubt about it, especially with the records. There's no doubt about it. They wouldn't just got rid of it mistakenly. They knew rightly what was happening. They knew rightly what was going on. But anyway, let me know what you think. Subscribe for more, and bye.